way to learn a new language. I've been using Babbel to brush up on my Spanish. Many of you guys know that I was supposed to go to Cancun this summer, and then I got COVID, so I had to reschedule that trip for the fall. And so I have a few extra months to kind of learn some new Spanish phrases to help me on that trip. Babbel is fun and so easy to use. They have these little 10-minute interactive lessons which are perfect for my busy schedule. I can pull out Babbel while I'm sitting in my car waiting to pick up my kids from swim lessons, and it just fits well into my busy schedule.
Mucho gusto.
The lessons are designed by real language teachers. It's not like an algorithm. So when I signed up, I disclosed that I'm wanting to learn Spanish for this upcoming trip. You can say why you're wanting to learn it. So I chose travel because that was an option. Babbel teaches more than just the language. It teaches you about the culture, the people, the history. They have award-winning technology, scientifically proven to get you speaking a new language in just 3 weeks. Babbel comes with a 20-day money-back guarantee, and I would definitely recommend Babbel. Check out the link down in the description box to get 65% off your subscription. Gracias, Babbel, patrocinar por este video. Okay, let's get into our case today. Today we are going to be talking about the disappearance of Melissa Brannen. Melissa Brannen was born on April 12th, 1984 in Texas to Michael and Tammy Brannen, and she was the only child born to this couple. They split soon after she was born, and she was raised primarily by her mother, Tammy. Melissa was very loved. Her mother worked incredibly hard to provide for her daughter. She worked as an accountant during the week, and then she took little part-time jobs on the weekends to help make ends meet. Tammy and Melissa were living at the Woodside apartment complex in Lorton, Virginia, when Melissa went missing. They'd been living there for a few years, and it was a great community. The complex itself felt like its own little community. They felt very safe living there, and they knew they were surrounded by friends. But it would be at this very apartment complex, in front of over 200 witnesses, that Melissa would go missing, and not one person would see what happened. On December 3rd, 1986, Tammy and Melissa attended a holiday party, which was hosted by the apartment complex in the clubhouse at the apartment. There were a lot of families that lived in these apartments, and so Melissa spent the evening running around with the other children, the other neighborhood children, and playing with friends. Around 10 p.m., Tammy was getting 5-year-old Melissa Melissa's bedtime at this point, and she is ready to get her home and to sleep. So she's talking to her neighbor, and she takes her eyes off Melissa for maybe 30 seconds. And when she looks back over to where the food table is, Melissa is gone. Tammy starts walking around the room looking for Melissa, but she can't find her. She quickly realizes that Melissa isn't in the room, so she starts looking through the entire building. But Melissa isn't anywhere. And at this point, Tammy is choking back panic, and she yells Melissa's name, asking everyone around if they had seen her daughter. Tammy makes her way to the building phone, and she calls police to report that her daughter is missing. Police arrive quickly and begin looking for Melissa, both inside and outside of the clubhouse. Time is of the essence because A, the missing child needs to be found quickly, but B, the temperatures outside were so frigid. Police knew that if they didn't bring Melissa home soon, she would likely die from exposure. They said they didn't believe she could survive more than an hour or two outside in the bitter cold before hypothermia would set in. Police were speaking with everyone at the party, and most people remembered seeing Melissa at some point, but no one happened to see where she had gone for those 30 seconds that her mother had her eyes off of her. The 30 seconds which her mother's back was turned, she just disappeared. But soon, police would find something that gave them a hint as to how Melissa could have gotten out of the building. In a utility room in the clubhouse, police found an open window. Now, this window hadn't been open for long because, like I said, the temperatures outside were freezing, and this open window would have let cold air in, enough to cool down the room and then also the hallway that it connected to. But they also know Melissa couldn't have gotten out of that window because it was very high. She would have never been able to get out of it on her own. She was too short, and there was nothing around that she could have climbed up on. At this point, foul play was not suspected. They're thinking they have a 5-year-old who wandered off. But that window had been recently opened by someone much taller than Melissa. The search expanded to the apartment complex itself and then all of the surrounding areas. Many of the guests of the party stayed back to help search for Melissa, so it wasn't just the police who were looking for her. Over 100 neighbors were helping as well. A detective showed up on scene named Bill Wilden, and he took Tammy to her apartment, and there were a couple of reasons for this. The first was to make sure Melissa hadn't just gotten antsy waiting for her mom and had just left and gone home. But the second reason was to try and get an idea of Melissa's life. Investigators often try to piece together all the parts of the missing person's life to try to get a picture of everything about them, because this helps them in their search. also began asking Tammy about her neighbors, if she had any issues with neighbors, if she had any problems with coworkers. But Tammy tells them she doesn't have problems with anybody. Now, the investigators could not rule out the possibility that Melissa had just wandered off with friends, or maybe she was just hiding somewhere in the building. While detectives were speaking with Tammy, patrol officers were on scene doing this massive search inside the building, looking anywhere they thought a little girl could hide. Tammy is back with police, telling them that she's a single mother. She was 27 years old at this point. She worked several jobs to make ends meet, and they had lived in the apartment complex for 3 years after relocating to Virginia from Texas. The detective was interested in Melissa's father because, as we know, when kids go missing, it is often someone close to the child who is involved in their abduction. But Tammy told police that her and her ex-husband had been divorced for many years, but they were on very good terms, and that Melissa's father, Michael Brannen, lived in Texas. At this point, Tammy is hysterical. She's telling the detective over and over, "This is not like my daughter. She wouldn't run away. She wouldn't think it's funny to hide from me like this." Police ended up calling Michael Brannen. And remember, this is 1987, so they couldn't call him on his cell phone. They called him on his landline to his home in Texas, and he answers, pretty much immediately ruling himself out as a suspect, because there was no way he could have gotten back to Texas already had he taken her. He tells police that he has no idea where Melissa is. So, this grid search of the area was underway with police and neighbors, and eventually Army personnel were brought in from a nearby Army base. Most of the people involved in this search believed that they would find Melissa. She would be shivering. She would be cold. But she had to just be lost in the woods, and they would find her and reunite her with her mother. Everyone was very hopeful that Melissa would be found alive and well. In the meantime, an officer finds something outside that utility closet. On the outside of that window, there were shoe prints in the snow, right under the window. And these shoe prints were walking away from the window, so it wasn't like someone had walked up to it and then away. It was quite obvious someone had come out the window and walked away. They followed these prints and they led to a parking lot and then disappeared. But it got investigators thinking, who would have known about this exit? It's not like most of the residents of the Woodside apartments would have known there was a window in the utility closet that they could use as a quick escape. parents of children at the party had actually noticed Caleb that evening. Many women told police that Caleb had made sexual propositions to them, and this, coupled with the fact that he spent most of the night playing with kids, which was alarming to parents. Not enough to call him out, but I guess enough to keep really close tabs on their children that night. It was just alarming, and he volunteered at one point to take the kids to the bathroom if they needed to go. None of the parents took him up on this offer. He kept touching the kids, picking them up, tickling them, putting them on his lap. So many of the residents of these apartments began talking about Caleb, and as police are hearing about his behavior, alarm bells are going off. Caleb had left the party before police had arrived, so they went to his house. He lived just 4 miles away. His wife answered the door. She said she did not know where he was. It would be hours before Caleb would show back up at his house. 2.5 hours to be exact. And when he got home, he found out police were looking for him. So he called police and they returned to his house. When officers arrived, they noticed that Caleb was wearing different clothing than he had been wearing at the Christmas party, because remember, at the Christmas party, he had been wearing his work uniform. And they asked where he had been for the last 2.5 hours, and he said that he took the long way home. He lived 4 miles away. Inside the washing machine in Caleb's home, police found Caleb's clothes that he had been wearing to the party. Which I guess isn't super weird to come home from work and immediately wash your clothes. When I worked at the hospital, I always threw my scrubs right in the washing machine as soon as I got home. But it was the other items found in the washing machine that were peculiar. Caleb's shoes were in there, his leather belt, his knife sheath, which was attached to his belt, although there was no knife in the sheath. The knife was missing, police would actually never find it. Police felt Caleb was super sus, and he kept saying he just took the long way home, but he was 4 miles from home. You could even walk 4 miles quicker than 2.5 hours. So, also, he got home in the middle of the night. His entire family was asleep, and he decided to wash every single article of clothing he had been wearing, red flags everywhere. Police really pushed Caleb to explain where he had been, and he really didn't seem to want to talk in front of his wife. So police are thinking he probably has a girlfriend and he doesn't want to say that he was at his girlfriend's house in front of his wife. So they take him to the police station to question him, thinking he would open up about where he had been. But he didn't. He had no alibi. He said he picked up a 6-pack at the gas station and drove the long way home. And he said that the reason he had immediately washed his clothes was because he only had one work uniform, so he had to wash it because he had to go back to work the next day. He also said he had no idea who Melissa Brannen was. And when officers said, "We think you may be involved in our disappearance," Caleb said, "Prove it." Police had nothing to hold Caleb on that night, but they did believe that he was responsible for Melissa's disappearance. The next morning, the search for Melissa had been expanded and missing persons posters were being distributed. Melissa had last been seen wearing a blue sweater with a big bird on it, a pink hooded ski jacket, and a red skirt with black shoes with little gold buckles on them. Melissa's disappearance was pretty quickly picked up by local and then national news, and police were working on finding her, but they only had the one suspect, and that was Caleb Hughes. They got permission from Caleb's wife to search the vehicle that he had been driving the night of the Christmas party. They towed it to the crime lab and tested it for everything that they could in 1989. Fingerprints, hair samples, fibers, and blood. The only fingerprints found in the car belonged to members of the Hughes family. I guess the car was a pretty disgusting mess. There were tons of fibers and hair, and this was like a big undertaking. They did collect all of the hairs. A luminol test was done on the car, and traces of blood were found on the steering wheel, the brake pedal, and the floor mat. Even though Caleb had washed his shoes, the lab was able to find possible bloodstains on them. So, his shoes had been cut, like the soles inside Caleb's front seat. Months went by, and Tammy Brennan waited, trying to keep up the hope that her daughter would be found alive. And then one day, she gets a phone call from a man saying he is holding Melissa for ransom for $75,000, and that he would kill Melissa unless this ransom was paid within 24 hours. Tammy was very hopeful that she would get Melissa back, but police and FBI agents tried to caution her not to get her hopes up. In child abduction cases, almost always the children are killed within 24 hours of being taken, so they didn't want her to get her hopes up, but she did. The FBI coordinated the ransom drop, and the men who showed up to pick up the money were just a couple of college students who were trying to make some fast money. They were convicted of extortion and conspiracy. So, remember how I said the Hughes car was super messy and they had collected all sorts of hairs and fibers? Well, they eventually found one light brown hair that was a perfect match to Melissa. Now again, this is before DNA testing, but when compared side by side, they were a perfect match. Police were also looking into the Big Bird outfit that Melissa had worn on the night she went missing. They found out that this outfit was sold through JCPenney exclusively for their Christmas 1989 catalog special. They didn't have any of this particular outfit left in stock, so the FBI got a list of people who had purchased the outfit from JCPenney, and agents literally went to homes all across the US trying to track down this outfit so that they could take it in and compare the fibers on it to fibers found in Caleb's car. The forensic scientist who was working the case kept finding these navy blue fibers with a purple hue in the car. So when he was finally able to compare them with the exact fibers from the outfit, he realized they too were a perfect match. And with this, police determined that Melissa Brannen had been inside the front seat of Caleb Hughes' car. Police believe that the night of the party, Caleb had been frustrated. He had gone there, he had hit on several women. Everyone had turned him down. He was drunk and he was frustrated, and so he waited and watched for an opportunity to present itself. And when he saw Melissa all alone, he grabbed her. They believed he abducted and killed her. So investigators charged Caleb with kidnapping, and they began getting ready for trial. And just before the trial was about to begin, police were notified that a child's body had been discovered on the median strip of Interstate 95. And apparently, I don't know how, but police knew Caleb was very familiar with the area where this body was found. So local authorities headed to the scene, believing the body to be that of Melissa Brannen. But the body was not Melissa's.